a 16-foot-long plant eater. Despite years of research, we're still trying to understand why it had this bizarre-shaped head. Long before the largest animals ever walked, swam, or flew across prehistoric Earth, the planet itself had to become something very different from what we know today. Gigantism did not appear by accident. It was the result of slow planetary changes that unfolded over billions of years. The story of Earth's giants begins not with animals, but with atmosphere, oceans, continents, and energy. Early Earth was hostile beyond imagination. More than 4 billion years ago, the planet was a molten world, scarred by constant asteroid impacts, volcanic eruptions, and a toxic atmosphere dominated by carbon dioxide, methane, ammonia, and sulfur compounds. Oxygen, the gas that fuels large and complex life today, was almost non-existent. Under such conditions, no large animal could survive. Life itself struggled just to exist. The earliest organisms were microscopic. Bacteria and archaea dominated the planet for nearly 2 billion years. They lived in oceans, hot springs, and beneath the surface of rocks. These organisms were simple, but they were powerful in one crucial way: through photosynthesis. Some of them slowly began releasing oxygen as a waste product. At first, this oxygen was absorbed by iron in the oceans, turning vast seas red with rust. Only when these sinks were filled did oxygen begin to accumulate in the atmosphere. This event, known as the Great Oxygenation, transformed Earth forever. Oxygen was toxic to many early life forms, causing the first mass extinction. But for others, it opened a revolutionary pathway. Oxygen allowed cells to generate far more energy than anaerobic processes ever could. Energy is the true currency of size. Without surplus energy, large bodies are impossible. Yet oxygen alone was not enough. For hundreds of millions of years after its rise, life remained small. Oceans were still chemically unstable, and continents were barren wastelands of rock and dust. The land was bombarded by ultraviolet radiation, unshielded by ozone. There were no soils, no plants, and no food webs capable of supporting large bodies. The first step toward gigantism came when life began to restructure entire environments. Microbial mats stabilized sediments along shorelines. Algae flourished in shallow seas. These primary producers formed the foundation of complex food chains. Energy was now being captured at unprecedented scales. As oceans grew richer, multicellular life emerged. Cells began cooperating, specializing, and forming tissues. Bodies gained symmetry, muscles, and nervous systems. Movement itself became a driving force in evolution. Predators appeared, and with them, the evolutionary arms race, speed, armor, and size suddenly mattered. But Earth was still preparing the stage. During the Paleozoic era, continents slowly assembled and broke apart. Shallow inland seas spread across vast regions, creating warm, nutrient-rich environments. These seas were biological factories, flooded with sunlight and minerals washed in from land. Productivity exploded. One of the most important changes occurred in atmospheric composition. Oxygen levels continued to rise, eventually reaching concentrations far higher than today. During certain periods, oxygen made up more than 30% of the air. This had profound consequences. High oxygen levels increased metabolic efficiency. Animals could sustain greater activity and larger bodies. Diffusion of oxygen through tissues became easier, especially for organisms without complex lungs. This is why some of the earliest giants were arthropods, insects, and their relatives breathe through tracheal systems that rely on diffusion. Higher oxygen allowed these systems to scale up dramatically. At the same time, gravity remained constant. Despite popular myths, gravity was no weaker in the past. Size did not increase because gravity allowed it. Size increased because biology learned how to manage weight through structure. Internal skeletons, jointed limbs, columnar legs, buoyancy in water, and specialized tissues all played critical roles. Water, in particular, was a key enabler. Buoyancy counteracts gravity, allowing animals to grow far larger than would ever be possible on land. This is why the first truly massive animals were marine. Oceans acted as cradles for gigantism. Temperature also mattered. Prehistoric Earth was generally warmer than today, with fewer polar ice caps and higher sea levels. Warm water holds less oxygen than cold water, but global productivity was so high that marine ecosystems remained rich. Warmth accelerated metabolism and growth rates, shortening the time needed to reach massive sizes. Plants played another decisive role. When vegetation finally colonized land, it transformed the planet's surface. Roots broke down rock into soil, forests stabilized climates and altered atmospheric chemistry. Oxygen surged again. Carbon was locked into massive plant bodies, later becoming coal. Land ecosystems gained the energy density required to support large herbivores. Once large herbivores appeared, predators followed. Energy flowed upward through food webs, allowing bodies to scale up again and again. Size became both weapon and defense. Larger animals could travel farther, digest tougher food, retain heat, and dominate territory. But gigantism was never unlimited. Size came with costs. Larger bodies required more food, longer growth periods, and stable environments. Any disruption could be catastrophic. This delicate balance explains why giants flourished only during certain windows in Earth's history. Extinction loomed constantly in the background. Volcanic eruptions could darken skies for years. Asteroid impacts could reset ecosystems in days. Climate shifts could collapse food chains. Giants were powerful, but also vulnerable. By the time the first true giants emerged, Earth had become a radically different world from its violent beginnings. It was a planet rich in oxygen, flooded with energy, and shaped by complex ecosystems. The stage was finally set. The giants did not appear all at once. They emerged in waves, each era producing its own titans. Some ruled the seas, others dominated land, some conquered the skies. All of them were products of Earth's long and fragile preparation. To understand the largest animals that ever existed, one must first understand this world before giants, a world that slowly learned how to feed, breathe, and sustain bodies on an unimaginable scale. A world that, for brief moments in deep time, allowed life to push beyond limits that seem impossible today. In the chapters ahead, we will enter those moments. We will follow the rise of the first marine giants, the monsters of ancient oceans, the colossal creatures that reshaped continents, and the forces that eventually brought them down. But every one of those stories begins here, in the deep past, when Earth itself was learning how to create giants. Next, Chapter 2, the first giants of the seas. The oceans were the first true testing ground for gigantism. Long before massive animals walked on land or ruled the skies, the seas provided a stable environment where size could evolve without the immediate constraints of gravity. Water supported weight, buffered temperature, and delivered nutrients across enormous distances. If Earth was ever going to produce giants, the oceans were where it would begin. Early marine ecosystems were deceptively simple. For hundreds of millions of years, life in the sea was dominated by microscopic organisms drifting in sunlit waters. Plankton formed the base of marine food webs, converting sunlight into chemical energy. Over time, this invisible rain of organic matter fed increasingly complex organisms on the seafloor. The Cambrian period marked a turning point. Animal body plans diversified rapidly. Shells, exoskeletons, jointed limbs, eyes, and primitive nervous systems appeared in a relatively short geological window. Predators emerged in earnest, and with them came escalation. Armor became thicker, movement faster, and bodies larger. Among the earliest candidates for gigantism were arthropods, trilobites. Distant relatives of modern insects and crustaceans dominated the seafloor. Most were small, but some species grew to astonishing sizes. Their segmented bodies and mineralized exoskeletons provided structural support, while the buoyancy of water allowed them to carry far more mass than terrestrial arthropods ever could. Predation pressure favored size. A larger body reduced the number of potential predators and allowed greater control over territory. Large animals could move sediments, reshape habitats, and exploit new food sources. Size itself became a survival strategy. One of the most iconic early marine giants was an apex predator that did not rely on teeth or claws, but on speed and grasping appendages. Anomalocaris patrolled Cambrian seas as one of the first truly large predators. Compared to its prey, it was enormous. Its presence signaled a new evolutionary reality. No longer was the ocean a world of passive drifting life. It had become a battlefield. As marine food webs grew more complex, energy flowed upward with increasing efficiency. Filter feeders emerged, capable of extracting vast quantities of microscopic life from the water. This feeding strategy would later enable some of the largest animals in history, but its roots lay deep in the Paleozoic seas. Oxygen levels continued to rise, particularly in shallow marine environments. This allowed animals to sustain higher activity levels and larger bodies. Respiration in water is energetically expensive, yet early giants overcame this through increased surface area, improved circulation, and more efficient gill structures. The Ordovician and Silurian periods saw the expansion of reef systems. Coral-like organisms built massive structures that transformed coastlines. Reefs acted as biodiversity engines, concentrating nutrients and shelter. Where reefs thrived, large animals followed. Cephalopods became the dominant giants of these seas. Unlike arthropods, they possessed internal shells or buoyant chambers that allowed precise control over depth. Straight-shelled nautiloids reached lengths that rivaled modern buses. They were among the first animals to truly master three-dimensional space in the ocean. These cephalopods were intelligent hunters by prehistoric standards. Keen vision, rapid movement, and grasping tentacles made them formidable. Their size placed them at the top of the food chain. For millions of years, they had no rivals. Yet, gigantism was never permanent. Environmental instability repeatedly reset marine ecosystems. Mass extinctions swept through the oceans, eliminating dominant groups and opening niches for new giants to emerge. The cycle of rise and collapse became a defining pattern. After each extinction, survivors diversified rapidly. The absence of established predators allowed size to increase again. This pattern would repeat throughout Earth's history. Giants often arose in the wake of disaster. As fish evolved jaws, the balance of power shifted. Armored fish grew to enormous sizes, protected by thick, bony plates. These were among the earliest vertebrate giants. Internal skeletons allowed for greater flexibility and growth than rigid exoskeletons ever could. Vertebrates brought a new approach to size. Muscles attached to internal bones could scale more efficiently. Circulatory systems became more powerful. Brains grew larger, movement became faster and more controlled. The oceans were entering a new phase. Buoyancy remained the critical advantage. Water supported immense mass, allowing bodies to expand without collapsing under their own weight. This is why, even today, the largest animals on Earth are marine. The blueprint for modern leviathans was laid hundreds of millions of years ago. Marine giants reshaped their environments. Massive bodies stirred sediments, redistributed nutrients, and influenced ocean chemistry. Their feeding habits altered plankton populations, affecting climate on a planetary scale. Size was not just a biological trait, it was a geological force. But the oceans were not uniformly friendly. Deep waters were cold, dark, and low in oxygen. True gigantism favored shallow continental shelves where sunlight fueled productivity. These regions expanded and contracted as sea levels rose and fell, controlling where giants could exist. Temperature fluctuations posed constant challenges. Warmer waters supported faster growth, but reduced oxygen availability. Colder waters held more oxygen, but slowed metabolism. Successful giants evolved strategies to balance these trade-offs. Reproduction also constrained size. Larger animals required longer development times and produced fewer offspring. This made them vulnerable to sudden environmental changes. Stability was essential. By the late Paleozoic, marine ecosystems had produced a succession of giants, each more advanced than the last. Arthropods gave way to cephalopods, cephalopods gave way to armored fish. The oceans were becoming increasingly dominated by vertebrates. Yet the true explosion of marine gigantism was still to come. The foundations were in place. Efficient circulation, powerful muscles, improved sensory systems, and stable food webs had transformed the seas into a realm where size could reach unprecedented extremes. The first giants of the seas were not the largest animals to ever exist, but they were the pioneers. They proved that Earth could sustain enormous bodies. They tested the limits of biology and showed what was possible when energy, oxygen, and environment aligned. In the next chapter, we will follow this trajectory forward into a time when marine predators grew beyond anything the Cambrian or Paleozoic oceans had ever seen. A time when the seas belonged to true super-predators, and gigantism reached levels that still dominate human imagination. Next, Chapter 3, Megalodon and the Age of Super-Predators. The rise of true super-predators marked a new phase in the history of life. These were not merely large animals. They were organisms so dominant that they reshaped entire ecosystems around themselves. In the oceans, this era reached its peak with predators that combined massive size, speed, and unmatched killing power. Among them stood one name that would echo across deep time as a symbol of marine terror and supremacy: Megalodon. But Megalodon did not appear suddenly. It was the product of millions of years of evolutionary escalation. The oceans had already produced giants, but now they would produce something more refined. Power was no longer just about size. It was about efficiency, specialization, and dominance at the very top of the food chain. By the time the age of superpredators began, vertebrates had fully taken control of the seas. Fish with jaws had diversified into countless forms. Some became fast pursuit hunters. Others relied on ambush. Cartilage-based skeletons, like those of sharks, offered flexibility and speed. Bone-based skeletons provided strength and leverage. Both paths would contribute to the rise of apex predators. Early sharks were modest in size, but they possessed a revolutionary weapon: replaceable teeth. Unlike most vertebrates, sharks could lose teeth repeatedly without consequence. This allowed them to experiment evolutionarily with tooth shape and function: slicing teeth, crushing teeth, gripping teeth. Selection refined these tools over millions of years. As marine mammals emerged, a new source of energy entered the oceans. Whales, seals, and dolphins were warm-blooded, energy-rich prey. Their blubber stored vast amounts of calories. For predators capable of killing them, the reward was enormous. This shift fundamentally changed oceanic food webs. Warm-blooded prey also meant fast prey. Marine mammals could swim with endurance and intelligence. Hunting them required power, speed, and precise attack strategies. Predators that failed to adapt were left behind. Predators that succeeded grew larger and stronger. Megalodon emerged into this world as the ultimate response to these pressures. It was not simply a giant shark. It was a hyper-specialized macro-predator built to hunt the largest animals in the ocean. Its body length likely exceeded anything seen in sharks today. Its jaws were enormous, capable of opening wide enough to engulf large portions of prey in a single bite. The teeth alone tell a story of excess. Triangular, serrated, and thick, each tooth functioned like a steak knife, reinforced with bone-crushing strength. These were not tools for tearing small fish. They were designed to slice through blubber, muscle, and bone with terrifying efficiency. Bite force estimates place Megalodon far beyond any living shark. A single bite could shatter whale ribs, collapse lungs, and cause catastrophic blood loss. Prey often died within moments, not from prolonged struggle, but from immediate trauma. Size gave Megalodon more than power. It gave reach. A massive body could patrol enormous territories. It could migrate across oceans, following prey populations as climate shifted. Its thermal mass allowed it to retain heat, possibly enabling regional endothermy. This would have allowed longer hunting periods and access to cooler waters. The presence of such a predator reshaped behavior across the oceans. Whales evolved larger sizes in part as a defense. A larger body reduced the number of effective predators. Herding behavior increased. Migration routes changed. Nursery areas formed in shallow waters where juveniles could grow with reduced risk. Even other predators adapted. Smaller sharks avoided regions dominated by Megalodon. Competition favored specialization. Some predators focused on speed, others on deep diving, others on pack behavior. Megalodon sat above them all, exerting pressure without direct competition. This was not an ecosystem of balance. It was an ecosystem ruled by fear and selection. Survival required constant adaptation. Weakness was removed swiftly. Strength propagated. Megalodon was not alone in this age. Giant predatory whales existed alongside it. Some had teeth nearly as fearsome. These animals competed for similar prey, and their interactions remain a subject of scientific debate. Whether they directly fought or partitioned resources, the result was the same. The oceans supported multiple superpredators simultaneously. This was possible only because productivity was extraordinarily high. Ocean currents distributed nutrients efficiently. Plankton blooms supported vast populations of filter-feeding whales. Energy flowed upward in immense quantities. The food pyramid was steep, but wide enough at the base to support giants at the top. Yet even superpredators are bound by limits. Size increases energy demands. Large predators must eat regularly and successfully. A missed hunt carries higher cost. Reproduction becomes slower. Population densities remain low. Dominance is absolute but fragile. Environmental change would prove fatal. As global climates cooled, ocean currents shifted. Nutrient distribution changed. Some whale populations declined or altered migration routes. Shallow seas shrank. Nursery grounds disappeared. Competition intensified as resources became less predictable. Megalodon faced a problem common to all giants. It was too specialized. Its teeth, jaws, and hunting strategies were optimized for large prey. When that prey declined or changed behavior, adaptation was slow. Smaller predators adapted more quickly. Great white sharks, with more generalist diets and faster reproductive cycles, survived where Megalodon did not. Versatility replaced brute force as the winning strategy. The extinction of Megalodon marked the end of an era. It was not the first giant predator to vanish, and it would not be the last. But its disappearance symbolized a broader shift in ocean ecosystems. The age of unchecked marine superpredators was over. Yet the legacy of Megalodon endures. Modern whales still carry scars on their evolutionary history. Their size, behavior, and social structures were shaped in a world where death could arrive from below in a single bite. The oceans today are calmer, but not because they are safer. They are calmer because the giants are gone. The age of superpredators demonstrated both the potential and the vulnerability of extreme size. When conditions were right, the ocean produced monsters beyond imagination. When conditions changed, even the greatest among them fell. In the next chapter, we will move beyond sharks and whales to explore other leviathans of the deep. Creatures that did not rely on teeth alone, but on size, strategy, and dominance, in ways that challenge everything we think we know about the limits of life in the ocean. Next, Chapter 4, Leviathans of the Deep. After the age of early giants and the reign of superpredators, the oceans entered a phase where size was no longer an experiment. It became a defining rule. This was the era of leviathans, animals so massive that they transformed the ocean itself simply by existing. These were not just hunters. They were moving ecosystems, living structures that altered currents, redistributed nutrients, and shaped the evolution of everything around them. To understand these leviathans, one must first understand how the ocean had changed. By this point in Earth's history, marine ecosystems were deeply layered. Surface waters teemed with plankton. Mid-waters hosted fast-moving predators and migratory species. The deep ocean remained cold, dark, and stable, acting as a vast reservoir of nutrients and carbon. Energy flowed continuously between these layers. This vertical structure allowed new feeding strategies to emerge. Not all giants needed to hunt large prey. Some learned to harvest energy directly from the base of the food web. This shift would unlock sizes that no predator alone could sustain. Filter feeding became the most powerful feeding strategy ever evolved. By straining enormous volumes of water, these animals could extract energy from countless microscopic organisms. Individually insignificant, together they formed the largest biomass on the planet. Whales would later perfect this method, but its origins stretched far deeper into prehistory. Early leviathans exploited this abundance. Massive bodies allowed them to swim efficiently across vast distances. Larger size, reduced drag per unit mass, making long migrations energetically cheap. In the ocean, being big was not always costly. In many ways, it was efficient. Marine reptiles emerged as dominant giants long before modern whales existed. These animals returned to the sea after evolving on land, bringing with them lungs, powerful muscles, and advanced senses. Freed from the weight-bearing constraints of land, their bodies expanded dramatically. Some marine reptiles evolved elongated necks and massive torsos. Others developed streamlined forms built for speed and endurance. Their skeletons were lighter than those of land animals, filled with spaces that reduced weight while maintaining strength. Buoyancy compensated for size, allowing bodies to grow far beyond terrestrial limits. These leviathans occupied different roles. Some were ambush predators, using sudden bursts of speed to capture prey. Others were pursuit hunters, capable of maintaining high speeds over long distances. Some focused on squid and fish. Others hunted fellow giants. The oceans of this time were crowded with enormous animals, each filling a distinct niche. Competition was intense, but resources were abundant enough to sustain multiple giants simultaneously. Temperature gradients played a crucial role. Warmer surface waters fueled plankton blooms, while cooler, deep waters stored oxygen. Leviathans evolved to move between these zones, feeding near the surface and resting in deeper layers. This vertical migration became a defining behavior of large marine animals. Size also provided thermal advantages. Large bodies retain heat more effectively, allowing activity in colder waters. This opened new hunting grounds and reduced competition. Some leviathans likely possessed partial warm-bloodedness, generating and retaining heat in key muscles and organs. As these giants grew larger, their impact on the ocean intensified. Massive tails stirred sediments on the seafloor. Feeding disrupted plankton layers. Waste products fertilized surface waters, stimulating new blooms. Leviathans were not passive inhabitants of the ocean, they were engineers. This feedback loop increased productivity. More plankton supported more giants. More giants redistributed more nutrients. The system reinforced itself, allowing extreme sizes to persist for millions of years. But gigantism also brought risk. Large bodies take time to grow. Many leviathans required decades to reach full size. During this long juvenile period, survival was uncertain. Predators targeted young individuals. Environmental changes could wipe out entire generations before they reproduced. Reproduction itself was slow. Giants produced fewer offspring, investing heavily in each one. This strategy worked only in stable environments. When conditions changed, populations collapsed rapidly. The deep ocean offered stability, but the surface world was volatile. Climate shifts altered currents and nutrient flow. Sea levels rose and fell, changing the size of shallow seas where productivity was highest. Volcanic eruptions injected ash and gases into the atmosphere, reducing sunlight and cooling the planet. Each disruption tested the limits of leviathan survival. Some giants adapted by becoming more flexible in diet. Others migrated longer distances. Some shrank slightly over generations, trading size for efficiency. But many could not change fast enough. Extinction events repeatedly swept through the oceans, removing dominant groups and reshaping ecosystems. After each collapse, new leviathans emerged, often larger or more specialized than those before. The ocean seemed determined to keep pushing the boundaries of size. One of the most remarkable aspects of these leviathans was their sensory world. Enormous eyes adapted to low light. Pressure-sensitive organs detected movement across vast distances. Sound traveled far underwater, and giants likely relied heavily on acoustic communication and awareness. The ocean was not silent. It was filled with low-frequency vibrations produced by waves, storms, tectonic activity, and the movements of other giants. Leviathans existed in a soundscape that extended for hundreds of kilometers. This awareness further reinforced dominance. Large animals could detect prey, rivals, and threats long before visual contact. Size amplified perception. Yet, even the greatest leviathans could not escape planetary limits. Oxygen levels fluctuated, carbon cycles shifted, all continents moved, altering currents that had existed for millions of years. The very forces that had enabled gigantism began to undermine it. As marine mammals rose, they inherited many of the advantages pioneered by earlier leviathans. Warm-blooded metabolism, advanced brains, social behavior, and efficient swimming combined with filter feeding to produce the largest animals ever to live. But these modern giants existed in a more constrained world. The ancient leviathans had thrived in an ocean that was warmer, richer, and less fragmented. Their disappearance marked the end of a unique chapter in Earth's history. What remains is a fossil record that hints at bodies longer than buildings, jaws wider than doorways, and lives measured in decades beneath prehistoric waves. These were not monsters in the fictional sense. They were products of natural laws pushed to their extremes. The leviathans of the deep represent the peak of marine gigantism, not just in size, but in influence. They shaped ecosystems, drove evolution, and demonstrated what life can achieve when constraints are temporarily lifted. But their story is also a warning. Size alone is not enough. Adaptability determines survival. The ocean may allow giants, but it does not protect them forever. In the next chapter, we will leave the water and follow gigantism onto land. There, without the support of buoyancy, animals faced a far harsher challenge. Yet, against all odds, Earth would produce land animals heavier than anything alive today. Next, Chapter 5, when land animals broke size limits. Leaving the ocean was one of the most dangerous decisions life ever made. On land, there was no buoyancy to support weight, no constant temperature to soften extremes, and no endless suspension of nutrients drifting past. Gravity was absolute. Every kilogram mattered. Yet despite these constraints, land animals would eventually grow heavier than anything alive today. This chapter is the story of how that seemingly impossible transition happened. The first animals that ventured onto land were not giants. They were small, fragile, and closely tied to water. Early arthropods crawled along damp shorelines, feeding on microbial mats and decaying plant matter. Their success did not come from size, but from simplicity and resilience. Land was empty, hostile, and full of opportunity. Plants paved the way. When vegetation colonized land, it transformed the surface of the planet. Roots fractured rock into soil. Organic matter accumulated. Rivers stabilized. Oxygen levels rose again as forests expanded. Land, once barren, became an energy-rich environment. This transformation was slow but relentless. Over millions of years, terrestrial ecosystems gained depth and complexity, food webs formed, herbivory emerged. Once animals could feed directly on plants, energy no longer had to pass through long aquatic chains. Calories became concentrated. This concentration of energy was the first requirement for terrestrial gigantism. The second requirement was structural innovation. Water supports mass, air does not. To grow large on land, animals needed internal frameworks capable of resisting gravity without collapsing. Exoskeletons, while effective at small sizes, scale poorly. As an animal grows, its mass increases faster than the strength of its outer shell. The solution was the internal skeleton. Vertebrates that moved onto land brought bones with them. These bones thickened, fused, and reorganized under selective pressure. Limbs rotated from a sprawled position to a columnar stance beneath the body. This change was revolutionary. Instead of muscles fighting gravity continuously, bones carried weight directly downward into the ground. This posture reduced energy cost and increased stability. It was the architectural foundation of large land animals. Lungs also evolved. Extracting oxygen from air is far more efficient than extracting it from water. This gave terrestrial animals a significant metabolic advantage. More oxygen meant more energy. More energy meant more muscle, more growth, and larger bodies. But growth came with new problems. Overheating became a serious threat. Large bodies generate heat internally, and air is a poor conductor of heat compared to water. Animals needed ways to dissipate excess warmth. Vascular skin, air sacs, and behavioral adaptations such as shade-seeking and activity timing became essential. Once these systems were in place, size could increase. The earliest large land animals were not dinosaurs or mammals. They were amphibian-like tetrapods that thrived in swampy environments. Their bodies grew heavy, their skulls massive. They dominated wetlands where water still provided partial support. These environments acted as transitional zones, easing the shift from aquatic to fully terrestrial life. As forests expanded, herbivory intensified. Plants evolved defenses. Thick bark, tough fibers, chemical toxins, animals responded by growing larger. Bigger bodies allowed longer digestive tracts, capable of breaking down low-quality plant material. Size also offered protection. Few predators could threaten a fully grown giant. This dynamic drove an evolutionary feedback loop. Plants grew tougher, herbivores grew larger, predators grew stronger. True terrestrial giants emerged when reptiles took control of land ecosystems. Their eggs did not require water. Their skin reduced moisture loss. Their metabolism was efficient. They were no longer tied to wetlands. Land in its entirety became available. Reptiles exploited this freedom. Some lineages experimented with size cautiously. Others pushed aggressively toward gigantism. Elongated bodies, reinforced vertebrae, and powerful limbs allowed mass to increase steadily over millions of years. One critical advantage reptiles possessed was metabolic flexibility. They did not need to maintain constant high body temperatures. This reduced energy demands dramatically. A massive reptile could survive on less food relative to its size than a mammal of equal mass in resource-limited environments. This was decisive. As continents shifted, climates varied regionally. Some regions became lush and productive. Others became arid. In fertile zones, giant herbivores flourished. Where giant herbivores existed, giant predators followed. Terrestrial gigantism reached new heights during periods of relative climatic stability. Long, warm intervals allowed forests to persist and spread. Stable plant productivity supported large populations of herbivores over long timescales. Gravity, however, remained an unforgiving constraint. Bone strength scales with cross-sectional area, while mass scales with volume. This mathematical reality meant that bones had to become disproportionately thicker as animals grew this limited maximum size. Terrestrial giants solved this problem by becoming slower and more energy efficient. Speed was sacrificed for mass. Columnar legs minimized bending stress. Joints locked into stable positions. Movement became deliberate, not agile. This is why the largest land animals were almost always herbivores. Predation requires speed, agility, and explosive power. These traits do not scale well with extreme mass. Herbivores could afford to be slow. Predators could not. Even the largest land predators were constrained by this reality. They were massive by modern standards, but still far smaller than the largest herbivores they hunted. Cooperation, ambush, and anatomical specialization helped compensate for this disparity. Respiration evolved further to support large size. Air sacs extended into bones, reducing weight and improving oxygen flow. Lungs became more efficient. Circulation systems grew stronger, delivering oxygen to massive muscles. These innovations pushed land animals beyond what once seemed possible. Yet the land environment never offered the same margin for error as the ocean. Droughts could collapse plant populations. Fires could devastate forests. Temperature extremes could push animals beyond physiological limits. Giants required consistency. This fragility explains why terrestrial gigantism appeared in bursts rather than continuously. When conditions were right, giants flourished. When conditions shifted, they vanished. Each extinction reset the system, and smaller, faster reproducing animals survived. Giants disappeared, only to re-emerge later in new forms when stability returned. The ability of land animals to break size limits was not a single event. It was a repeated achievement, won and lost many times across deep time. Each attempt refined the blueprint. By the time the greatest land giants emerged, the planet had already tested and discarded countless designs. Only the most efficient combinations of structure, metabolism, and behavior succeeded. These giants did more than exist. They reshaped land itself. Their footsteps compacted soil. Their feeding patterns altered vegetation. Their migrations carved paths across continents. Like their marine counterparts, they were ecosystem engineers. But unlike the ocean, land could not hide instability. When change came, it came quickly and brutally. The story of terrestrial gigantism is therefore one of tension. Immense success balanced on narrow margins. Enormous power dependent on fragile conditions. In the next chapter, we will follow this trajectory to its extreme. We will examine the heaviest animals to ever walk the earth. Creatures whose mass defied gravity itself and whose existence still challenges the limits of biology. Next, Chapter 6, Sauropods, the heaviest animals to ever walk Earth. When terrestrial gigantism reached its absolute peak, it did not belong to predators, nor to mammals, nor to any lineage alive today. It belonged to a group of animals so massive that their existence still strains the limits of physics and biology. These were the sauropods. Long-necked, long-tailed, pillar-legged giants that became the heaviest land animals to ever walk the earth. No animal before or after has matched them in sheer mass. The rise of sauropods was not sudden. It was the culmination of evolutionary experiments that unfolded over tens of millions of years. Earlier, herbivorous dinosaurs had already grown large, but sauropods pushed beyond every previous boundary. They did not simply grow bigger, they redefined what big meant on land. To understand how this was possible, one must begin with their skeleton. Sauropod bones were not solid blocks of weight. They were marvels of biological engineering. Their vertebrae were filled with air spaces, reducing mass without sacrificing strength. This internal scaffolding functioned like a truss bridge, distributing stress efficiently across the skeleton. Air sacs invaded the bones, lightening the structure and improving oxygen flow. This system allowed sauropods to grow enormous without collapsing under their own weight. Their limbs were another key innovation. Unlike the bent limbs of mammals or the sprawling posture of early reptiles, sauropod legs were straight, vertical columns. Bones aligned directly beneath the body, transferring weight straight into the ground. Joints were stable, not flexible. Movement was slow but efficient. This posture minimized bending forces. The greatest enemy of massive land animals, sauropods did not run. They did not need to. Their size was defense enough. Their feet were wide and padded, spreading weight across a large surface area. Each step was a controlled transfer of tons of mass. Trackways show deliberate movement, with little wasted motion. Energy conservation was critical at this scale. The neck is what captures imagination, but it is also one of the most misunderstood features. Sauropod necks could exceed 10 meters in length, yet they were not heavy. Each vertebra was honeycombed with air spaces. Muscles and tendons were arranged to support the neck like suspension cables rather than solid beams. This allowed the neck to function as a feeding tool, not a burden. Instead of moving their entire bodies to reach food, sauropods could sweep vast areas of vegetation with minimal energy cost. A single individual could feed across an area that would require dozens of smaller animals. This feeding strategy changed everything. By browsing high vegetation, sauropods accessed food resources unavailable to other herbivores. Competition was reduced. Forests became vertical ecosystems, with different animals feeding at different heights. Sauropods dominated the upper canopy. Their digestive systems were equally specialized. Plants are low in energy and difficult to break down. Sauropods compensated with enormous guts. Long digestive tracts allowed fermentation by microbes, extracting nutrients slowly but efficiently. They did not chew. They swallowed vegetation whole, relying on time and volume rather than processing. This strategy favored size. The larger the body, the more room for digestion, and the more efficiently low-quality food could be converted into growth. Metabolism played a decisive role. Sauropods were not fully warm-blooded like mammals, nor cold-blooded like modern reptiles. They occupied an intermediate state. Their immense size allowed them to retain heat easily. Once warm, they stayed warm. This condition, known as thermal inertia, reduced energy costs dramatically. A massive sauropod did not need to constantly burn calories to maintain body temperature. Its own bulk did the work. This allowed populations of giants to exist without collapsing ecosystems. Growth rates were rapid. Fossil evidence suggests sauropods grew quickly during early life, reaching immense sizes in just a few decades. This reduced the vulnerable juvenile period. Once large, predation risk dropped sharply. Predators did exist, but even the largest carnivorous dinosaurs faced severe limitations. A healthy adult sauropod was effectively untouchable. Hunting likely focused on juveniles, sick individuals, or coordinated attacks on smaller species. This dynamic shaped behavior, herding provided protection for young adults, formed moving walls of mass. Predators adapted by becoming selective, not reckless. The presence of sauropods transformed landscapes. Forests were not static environments. Trees were broken, uprooted, and stripped. Clearings formed along migration routes. Seeds were spread across continents through dung. Nutrient cycles accelerated. Sauropods were living geological forces. Their sheer numbers amplified this effect. During peak periods, sauropods were not rare. They were among the most common large animals in their ecosystems. Entire continents supported multiple species simultaneously, each adapted to slightly different feeding strategies and environments. Some favored wetter floodplains, others preferred drier uplands. Neck length, skull shape, and body proportions varied to reduce competition. Gigantism did not produce uniformity. It produced diversity at extreme scale. Climate stability was essential. Sauropods thrived during long, warm intervals, when forests persisted for millions of years. High atmospheric carbon dioxide supported rapid plant growth. Oxygen levels were sufficient to sustain large bodies. Seasons were less extreme. When these conditions held, sauropods flourished, but size brought vulnerability. Reproduction was slow. Eggs were laid in large numbers, but survival rates were low. Environmental disruption could wipe out entire nesting grounds. Droughts could collapse food supplies. Volcanic events could poison air and soil. Because sauropods required so much food, even small declines in productivity had outsized consequences. A forest that could no longer sustain giants would collapse rapidly under continued browsing pressure. This created a narrow window of viability. Sauropods were incredibly successful, but only within stable worlds. As continents shifted and climates cooled, those worlds disappeared. The decline of sauropods was not instant. Populations fragmented. Species ranges shrank. Diversity declined. Giants persisted longer in some regions than others, but the trend was irreversible. When ecosystems lost the capacity to support extreme size, sauropods vanished. No land animal has ever reclaimed that scale. Mammals inherited the land, but their biology imposed stricter limits. Warm-blooded metabolism demanded constant energy intake. Bones lacked extensive air spaces. Reproduction favored live birth. Limiting size, gravity reasserted its dominance. The age of the heaviest land animals ended with the sauropods. Their legacy, however, remains unmatched. They demonstrated that land, under the right conditions, could support animals heavier than any creature alive today. They proved that size was not a simple function of strength, but of efficiency, structure, and ecological balance. The bones left behind are not merely fossils. They are records of a planet operating at maximum biological capacity. In the next chapter, we will examine the ecosystems built around these titans, how gigantic herbivores shaped entire worlds, and how their presence determined the fate of every other organism around them. Next, Chapter 7, Titanic Herbivores and Living Ecosystems. Giant herbivores were not simply large animals moving through prehistoric landscapes. They were the architects of those landscapes. Wherever titanic plant eaters existed, the environment bent around them. Forests, plains, rivers, and even the atmosphere responded to their presence. To understand prehistoric Earth at its most productive and extreme, one must understand how these massive herbivores functioned as living ecosystems. Size changed everything. A small herbivore reacts to its environment. A titanic herbivore reshapes it. The most important factor was consumption. Giant herbivores consumed staggering quantities of plant material every single day. Not selectively, not delicately, but at scale. Trees were stripped of leaves, branches were broken, shrubs were flattened. This constant pressure prevented any single plant species from dominating for long. As a result, vegetation remained dynamic. Forests opened into mosaics of clearings, thickets, and regrowth zones. Sunlight reached the forest floor more often. Plant diversity increased rather than decreased. Paradoxically, destruction fueled abundance. This process mirrors what modern elephants do on a smaller scale. But prehistoric giants amplified the effect across entire continents. Their feeding height mattered. By browsing at different levels, giant herbivores created vertical stratification in vegetation. Low browsers shaped grasses and shrubs. Mid-height feeders targeted young trees. High browsers stripped canopy foliage. No layer was left untouched. This prevented ecological stagnation. Plants evolved rapidly, developing new growth strategies. Fast regrowth, tough fibers, chemical defenses, and massive seed production all appeared in response to sustained herbivory. Giant herbivores were selective in one critical way. They favored abundant plants over rare ones. This prevented any single species from being wiped out entirely. Rare plants had refuge simply by being uncommon. Common plants bore the brunt of feeding, but their numbers allowed survival. This balance produced ecosystems that were resilient rather than fragile. Movement amplified these effects. Titanic herbivores did not stay in one place. They migrated. Seasonal changes in rainfall and temperature drove massive movements across landscapes. These migrations were not chaotic. They followed ancient routes shaped by geography and vegetation cycles. As herds moved, they grazed intensely, then left. This allowed vegetation time to recover. By the time herds returned, plant biomass had regenerated. This pulse grazing prevented overexploitation and maintained long-term productivity. The ground itself was transformed. Footsteps weighing several tons compacted soil, altering water infiltration in some areas. This created hardened pathways that guided future movement. In others, it created shallow basins that collected rainwater. These depressions became temporary ponds, supporting amphibians, insects, and plants that required standing water. Riverbanks were reshaped as giants crossed them repeatedly. Sediment was redistributed. Channels shifted. Floodplains expanded. The physical geography of entire regions evolved in response to repeated animal movement. Dung played a critical role. Giant herbivores produced enormous quantities of waste. This was not refuse, it was fertilizer. Nutrient-rich dung returned nitrogen, phosphorus, and carbon to the soil. Insects colonized it rapidly. Beetles, flies, and microbes broke it down, accelerating nutrient cycling. Plants growing near dung piles experienced explosive growth. This created nutrient hotspots across the landscape. Smaller herbivores were drawn to these areas. Predators followed. Dung also dispersed seeds. Many plants evolved to survive digestion, relying on herbivores for transport. Seeds deposited far from parent plants avoided competition and disease. Entire plant ranges expanded due to herbivore movement. This relationship was not accidental. It was coevolution. Plants that benefited from being eaten thrived. Those that could not adapt declined. Over millions of years, ecosystems became tightly coupled to the presence of giant herbivores. Even fire regimes were affected. By consuming vast amounts of vegetation, giant herbivores reduced fuel loads. This limited the frequency and intensity of wildfires. Fires still occurred, but they were patchy rather than catastrophic. This created a landscape of mixed ages and structures, further increasing biodiversity. When giants declined or disappeared, fire behavior changed dramatically. Fuel accumulated. Fires became larger and more destructive. Ecosystems shifted abruptly. Predators existed within this herbivore-shaped world, but they were constrained by it. Large herbivores were difficult to kill. Predators adapted by focusing on juveniles, injured individuals, or smaller species that shared the ecosystem. This selective pressure reinforced social behavior among herbivores. Herding reduced predation risk. Adults formed protective rings around young. Synchronized movement confused predators. Communication signals evolved to warn of danger. Herds themselves became moving habitats. Parasites lived on their skin. Birds fed on insects, stirred up by their movement. Small animals followed herds to exploit disturbed ground. Predators trailed at a distance, waiting for opportunity. The ecosystem was not a static backdrop. It moved with the giants. Water sources were particularly influenced. Giant herbivores required large quantities of water. Their repeated visits to rivers and lakes widened shorelines. Vegetation was trampled, creating access points. Mudflats formed, supporting aquatic plants and invertebrates. During droughts, these access points became lifelines for entire ecosystems. Animals congregated around water shaped by giants. Without these modifications, many species would have perished. Even atmospheric processes were affected. By promoting plant growth and cycling nutrients rapidly, giant herbivores influenced carbon storage. Forests grazed by giants often stored carbon differently than untouched forests. More carbon was locked in soil through rapid turnover of organic matter. Methane emissions from digestion also entered the atmosphere, subtly influencing climate over geological timescales. This interaction between biology and climate illustrates how deeply integrated these animals were into planetary systems. Titanic herbivores were not isolated anomalies. They were keystone species on a continental scale. Remove them, and the entire system changed. This reality becomes clear when examining periods of decline. When environmental stress reduced herbivore populations, vegetation responded immediately. Forests became denser. Undergrowth thickened. Diversity dropped as dominant species outcompeted others. Fire frequency increased. Nutrient cycling slowed. Predators declined due to reduced prey availability. Smaller herbivores either exploded in number or vanished depending on niche availability. Ecosystems simplified. This pattern repeated throughout Earth's history. Each time giant herbivores disappeared, ecosystems lost complexity and resilience. Recovery took millions of years and often required the evolution of new giants to restore balance. This explains why gigantism reappeared repeatedly. It was not an evolutionary accident. It was an ecological solution. Large herbivores solved the problem of excess plant growth. They redistributed energy efficiently. They maintained open, diverse landscapes. They stabilized food webs. But the solution was fragile. Giants required stability, long growing seasons, predictable rainfall, expansive habitats. When continents fragmented, climates cooled, or seasonality intensified, those requirements were no longer met. Habitats shrank, migration routes were cut, plant productivity declined. Giants became trapped in landscapes that could no longer support them. Once populations dropped below a critical threshold, recovery was impossible. Reproduction was too slow. Juveniles were too vulnerable. Extinction followed. Yet even in extinction, their influence persisted. Soils formed under giant herbivore regimes retained unique structures. Plant communities bore the imprint of ancient grazing. Fossil pollen records reveal shifts in vegetation long after the animals themselves vanished. Their absence created a void that was never fully filled. Modern ecosystems lack true equivalents. Even the largest living herbivores are ecological shadows of their prehistoric counterparts. They shape landscapes locally, but not continentally. The scale is smaller. The impact reduced. This loss has consequences. Many modern ecosystems are less productive, less diverse, and more prone to collapse under stress. The giants once acted as buffers, absorbing environmental fluctuations and redistributing resources. The titanic herbivores of prehistoric Earth were not just consumers, they were regulators, engineers, stabilizers. Their story forces a re-evaluation of how size functions in nature. Extreme size is often viewed as excess, as inefficiency. Yet in these ecosystems, size was the mechanism that kept systems functioning. Only when size became impossible did ecosystems simplify. As we move forward in this story, a critical tension emerges. Where there are giants, there are forces that seek to challenge them. No ecosystem remains unbalanced forever. In the next chapter, we will turn to the hunters that dared to confront giants, predators that evolved strategies not to overpower mass directly, but to exploit its weaknesses. The age of titanic herbivores was also the age of predators that learned how to hunt the largest prey Earth would ever produce. Next, Chapter 8, Giant Predators that hunted giants. Wherever titanic herbivores dominated prehistoric landscapes, predators evolved in their shadow. These hunters faced a paradox. The largest prey animals contained enormous energy, but they were also armored by sheer mass. Brute force alone was not enough. To survive, predators had to become specialists, evolving strategies that allowed them to exploit weakness rather than strength. Giant predators did not need to be larger than their prey. They needed to be precise. The rise of giant herbivores reshaped predatory evolution. Small prey was abundant, but competition for it was fierce. Hunting giants, even selectively, offered access to resources unavailable to most carnivores. One successful kill could sustain a predator for days or weeks. But failure carried risk. Injury meant death. This selective pressure favored predators that combined size with intelligence, coordination, and anatomical specialization. These animals were not reckless, they were calculated. Most giant predators shared a common design philosophy. Massive skulls, reinforced necks, powerful jaws, and cutting teeth designed to inflict maximum damage quickly. Speed mattered, but endurance and stability mattered more. A predator could not afford to be thrown off balance by struggling prey. Bone structure reveals this emphasis. Limb bones were thick and robust, built to absorb shock rather than maximize speed. Joints were reinforced. Musculature focused on sudden bursts of force rather than sustained pursuit. Predators evolved to target specific vulnerabilities. Juveniles were prime targets. Their bones were not fully developed. Their coordination was limited. By removing young individuals, predators reduced future competition and shaped herbivore population structures. Sick and injured adults were also targeted. Disease, age, and injury created openings. Predators acted as selective filters, removing individuals that weakened herd resilience. Direct attacks on healthy adults were rare but not impossible. Ambush was key. Surprise attacks focused on disabling bites to legs, necks, or tails. Immobilization turned mass into a liability. Cooperation magnified effectiveness. While not all giant predators hunted in groups, evidence suggests some species did. Coordinated attacks allowed predators to harass, distract, and exhaust prey. One individual might draw attention, while another delivered a disabling strike. This behavior required communication, memory, and social structure. Hunting giants was not instinctive, it was learned. The presence of giant predators influenced herbivore behavior profoundly. Constant threat-shaped vigilance, herd formation tightened, movement patterns changed, feeding times shifted to reduce vulnerability. This arms race drove rapid evolution on both sides. Giant predators also had to manage their own size limits. Growing too large reduced speed and increased energy demands. Most predators reached an optimal size that balanced power and agility. Only a few lineages experimented with extreme mass, and even then, limits were clear. Teeth provide insight into predatory strategy. Blade-like teeth evolved to slice flesh efficiently, minimizing struggle time. Serrations reduced friction and prevented teeth from getting stuck. This allowed predators to withdraw quickly after delivering lethal wounds. Jaw mechanics favored wide gapes. A predator did not need to crush bone entirely. It needed to create massive wounds that led to shock and blood loss. This approach conserved energy and reduced risk. Neck muscles were critical. Delivering a powerful bite required stabilizing the skull against struggling prey. Enlarged neck vertebrae and muscle attachment sites indicate that force generation was concentrated in this region. The digestive system also adapted. Giant predators often consumed large quantities of meat at once, then went long periods without feeding. Stomachs expanded. Metabolism slowed between meals. This feast and famine strategy matched the unpredictable nature of hunting large prey. Scavenging played a larger role than often assumed. Giant predators did not waste energy unnecessarily. If another predator or environmental event created a carcass, they exploited it. Dominance allowed them to displace smaller scavengers easily. This behavior reinforced their position at the top of food webs. Giant predators were not numerous. Their populations were sparse. Territories were vast. This reduced competition and prevented overexploitation of prey. Balance emerged not through restraint, but through scarcity. Environmental stability was again crucial. If prey populations fluctuated wildly, predators suffered first. Reproduction was slow. Raising offspring required extended parental investment. Loss of a single adult could destabilize local populations. When climate shifted, giant predators faced rapid decline. Prey migrated or vanished. Territories fragmented. Specialized hunters struggled to adapt. This vulnerability explains why giant predators often disappeared earlier or more frequently than their herbivorous prey. When ecosystems collapsed, the top fell first. Yet their influence during their existence was profound. By controlling herbivore populations, predators prevented overgrazing. They maintained plant diversity indirectly. They enforced evolutionary discipline, favoring alertness, strength, and cooperation. Without predators, herbivore populations would grow unchecked, leading to resource collapse. Predators were the counterweight to size. This dynamic highlights a fundamental truth. Gigantism does not eliminate vulnerability. It changes its form. Even the largest animals that ever lived were shaped by fear. Fear drove behavior. Fear drove evolution. Fear maintained balance. Giant predators themselves were not immune to being prey in different stages of life. Juveniles were vulnerable. Nests were targeted. Competition among predators was intense. Dominance had to be maintained constantly. The image of an unstoppable apex predator is misleading. Survival at the top required continuous success. Failure meant extinction. Over deep time, predator lineages rose and fell repeatedly. Some disappeared without descendants. Others gave rise to smaller, more adaptable forms that survived changing conditions. This pattern would repeat again when mammals rose to dominance. The era of giant predators hunting giants represents one of the most extreme expressions of evolutionary pressure. Every interaction was high stakes. Every adaptation mattered. These hunters were not monsters in the cinematic sense. They were precise tools shaped by natural selection to operate at the edge of possibility. In the next chapter, we will shift our attention upward. Gigantism did not stop at land and sea. It reached into the skies. There, under entirely different constraints, life produced flying animals larger than anything capable of flight today. Next, Chapter 9. The skies weren't empty. For much of human history, the sky has been imagined as a realm of birds and clouds, a space defined by lightness and fragility. Yet in deep time, the skies were anything but empty. They were once occupied by animals so large that their shadows would have swept across prehistoric landscapes like moving storms. These were the giants of the air, creatures that proved that even flight, the most demanding form of movement, could be conquered at extreme scale. Flight is unforgiving. Gravity never relents, and the margin for error is small. To leave the ground, an animal must generate lift equal to its weight to stay airborne. It must do so continuously. Every extra kilogram increases the energy required. For this reason, flying animals today are relatively small. Even the largest modern birds operate close to their physical limits. Prehistoric flyers pushed far beyond those limits. The rise of aerial gigantism required a precise alignment of conditions. High atmospheric oxygen was critical. Denser air improves lift and reduces the energy cost of flight, During certain periods of Earth's history, oxygen levels were significantly higher than today. This did not make gravity weaker, but it made flight more forgiving. Temperature and climate stability mattered as well. Warm air rises, creating thermal currents. These invisible columns of rising air allow large flyers to stay aloft with minimal effort. Modern birds like condors and albatrosses exploit thermals, but prehistoric giants depended on them. The structure of wings was another decisive factor. Wings do not scale linearly. As size increases, wing area must increase faster than body mass to maintain lift. Prehistoric giants solved this by developing enormous wingspans, far exceeding anything alive today. Their wings were not simply larger versions of modern bird wings. They were optimized differently. Bones were elongated and hollow. Joints were reinforced. Membranes or feathers were arranged to maximize lift while minimizing weight. Every gram mattered. One of the earliest experiments in aerial gigantism came from insects. In the Carboniferous period, dragonfly-like insects reached wingspans that seem impossible today. Their success was directly tied to atmospheric composition. Oxygen levels allowed passive diffusion through their tracheal systems at scales that would be lethal now. These insects dominated the air as predators, hunting other insects with speed and agility. But insect flight had limits. Exoskeletons scale poorly. Muscle attachment points become inefficient at large sizes. Eventually, the insect blueprint could not support further growth. Vertebrates would take flight next. Reptiles were the first vertebrates to truly conquer the sky. They did not evolve from birds, but along a separate path. Their wings were membranes supported by elongated fingers, not feathered arms. This design allowed vast wing surfaces without excessive bone mass. These flying reptiles became the largest animals ever to achieve powered flight. Their bodies were light but strong. Bones were reinforced internally with struts. Air sacs extended throughout the body, reducing weight and improving oxygen delivery. Lungs were efficient, allowing sustained activity. Launching into flight was the greatest challenge. Large flyers could not simply flap and lift off vertically. They required specialized launch strategies. Evidence suggests they used powerful forelimbs to vault into the air, converting muscular force into initial lift. Once airborne, their size became an advantage. Large wings generated lift efficiently, and gliding required little energy. Flight style mattered. These giants were not constant flappers. They soared. They rode thermals and coastal winds, traveling long distances with minimal effort. In the air, they were graceful rather than cumbersome. Feeding strategies adapted to this mode of life. Some were fish hunters, skimming over water and snatching prey with elongated jaws. Others were scavengers, using keen eyesight to locate carcasses across vast areas. Some may have hunted smaller animals on land, landing briefly before taking off again. Landing itself was risky. A misjudged landing could result in broken bones. Selection favored individuals with precise control and strong limbs, wings folded carefully, bodies aligned to absorb impact. These aerial giants occupied niches unavailable to any other animals. They connected ecosystems. By moving freely between land and sea, they transferred nutrients across boundaries. Their feeding habits linked food webs separated by geography. Their presence also influenced behavior on the ground. Small animals responded to shadows overhead. Herds may have altered movement patterns to avoid aerial predators. The sky became a source of threat as well as opportunity. Yet aerial gigantism was even more fragile than terrestrial gigantism. Flight demands constant energy input. Even soaring requires muscle control and awareness. Injuries were often fatal. Reproduction was slow. Eggs were vulnerable. Nesting sites had to be carefully chosen, often on cliffs or isolated areas to reduce predation risk. Climate instability posed severe challenges. Changes in wind patterns reduced access to thermals. Cooling climates increased air density in some regions but reduced productivity overall. Food sources became less predictable. When ecosystems shifted, aerial giants had little margin for adaptation. As oxygen levels declined toward modern values, the cost of flight increased. Animals that had evolved near the upper limits of size suddenly found themselves operating beyond sustainable thresholds. Even slight reductions in atmospheric support could ground them permanently. Competition also intensified. Birds evolved with feathers, which offered superior control and insulation. While birds remained smaller, they were more versatile. Faster reproduction allowed quicker adaptation. Social behavior increased efficiency. Aerial giants could not compete on these terms. Extinction followed the familiar pattern. Populations declined gradually. Range fragmentation isolated groups. Breeding success dropped. Once numbers fell below a critical threshold, recovery was impossible. The disappearance of these giants left the skies quieter but also simpler. Birds inherited the air, but within tighter constraints, the sky would never again host animals of such scale. Their fossils tell a story of wingspans wider than small aeroplanes, of skulls longer than a human torso, of bodies balanced delicately between gravity and lift. They challenge assumptions about what flight can be. Aerial gigantism demonstrates a recurring theme in the history of life. When environmental conditions temporarily relax constraints, evolution pushes toward extremes, size increases, specialization intensifies. Dominance emerges, but these extremes are always temporary. Flight, more than any other mode of life, exposes the cost of specialization. When the environment changes, there is nowhere to hide. The sky offers freedom, but no shelter. The giants of the air represent one of the most extraordinary achievements in evolutionary history. They mastered the most demanding form of locomotion at scales that should not have been possible. Their extinction was not a failure of design, but a reminder of dependence. Their success was inseparable from a world that no longer exists. In the next chapter, we will descend again, this time to a world often overlooked. Not the giants of bone and muscle, but the giants of joint and shell. Prehistoric insects and arthropods that grew far beyond anything alive today, revealing how even the smallest blueprints can produce giants under the right conditions. Next, Chapter 10. Prehistoric insects and arthropod giants. When people imagine prehistoric giants, they usually think of towering dinosaurs or oceanic leviathans. Rarely do they picture insects. Yet there was a time when the world belonged to arthropods of extraordinary size. Creatures built on the same basic blueprint as modern insects, spiders, and crustaceans, but scaled up to proportions that feel unsettling even today. This was not fantasy. It was biology operating under conditions that no longer exist. Arthropods were among the earliest animals to dominate land and air. Their success lay in simplicity and efficiency. Segmented bodies, jointed limbs, and hardened exoskeletons provided protection and mobility without the metabolic cost of internal skeletons. At small sizes, this design is nearly unbeatable. At large sizes, however, it faces strict limitations. And yet, for a window of deep time, those limits were pushed far beyond what we see today. The key to arthropod gigantism lies in respiration. Unlike vertebrates, insects do not breathe through lungs. They rely on a network of tubes called tracheae that deliver oxygen directly to tissues. Oxygen enters through openings along the body and diffuses inward. This system works exceptionally well at small scales. Diffusion distances are short, and oxygen reaches cells efficiently. As body size increases, diffusion becomes a problem. Oxygen must travel farther. Tissues deeper within the body risk suffocation in the modern atmosphere. This places a firm upper limit on insect size. But prehistoric Earth was not modern Earth. During the late Paleozoic era, atmospheric oxygen levels were dramatically higher than today. Estimates suggest concentrations approaching or exceeding 30%. This created an environment where oxygen diffusion was far more effective. Tissues that would be starved today could receive adequate oxygen even at larger body sizes. This single factor unlocked a world of giants. Dragonfly-like insects with wingspans rivaling birds patrolled ancient skies. Millipede-like arthropods grew longer than automobiles. Spiders reached sizes that would make modern ecosystems unrecognizable. These animals were not anomalies. They were common, successful, and ecologically dominant. Arthropod exoskeletons also benefited from high oxygen. Producing chitin and maintaining rigid external armor requires energy. Increased oxygen availability reduced metabolic stress, allowing thicker, stronger exoskeletons to form without compromising survival. This armor provided protection and structural support at large sizes. However, exoskeletons become heavy. Molting becomes dangerous. Shedding an exoskeleton leaves an animal vulnerable, and for a giant arthropod, the risks multiply. Prehistoric giants mitigated this through slower growth and longer lifespans. Molts were less frequent, occurred in stages, each carefully timed to environmental stability. Ecosystems were stable enough to allow this strategy to succeed. Arthropod giants occupied a wide range of niches. Predatory insects dominated the air, hunting smaller arthropods and early vertebrates. Their vision was acute. Compound eyes scaled well, providing wide fields of view. Flight allowed rapid response and escape. These predators were the top aerial hunters of their time. On land, massive detritivores processed enormous amounts of plant material. Forests of the Carboniferous period produced vast quantities of leaf litter. Giant arthropods consumed this debris, breaking it down and recycling nutrients. They played a role similar to modern decomposers, but at a scale far greater. This recycling fueled plant growth. Dense forests thrived, further increasing oxygen production. A powerful feedback loop emerged. Plants fed arthropods. Arthropods fed plants indirectly. Oxygen levels remained high. Predatory arthropods exerted pressure on prey populations. Speed, armor, and defensive chemicals evolved rapidly. Arms races intensified. Even plants responded, producing tougher tissues and chemical deterrents. Arthropods were not just participants in ecosystems, they were drivers of evolutionary change. Their success, however, was tightly bound to atmospheric conditions. As continents shifted and climates changed, oxygen levels began to decline. Forests contracted, wetlands dried, and fire frequency increased, consuming biomass and reducing oxygen production. The feedback loop weakened. As oxygen fell, diffusion limits returned. Large arthropods struggled to breathe. Metabolic stress increased. Growth slowed. Survival rates dropped. Smaller body sizes became advantageous again. Vertebrates also began to compete more effectively. Early reptiles and amphibians exploited declining oxygen levels with lungs that could extract oxygen efficiently regardless of size. They were not constrained by diffusion in the same way. Predation pressure increased on arthropods. Vertebrates developed stronger jaws and faster movement. Giant arthropods, once dominant, became targets. The molting process became a liability. Large arthropods required safe periods to shed exoskeletons. Increased predation reduced those safe windows. Juveniles suffered high mortality. One by one, giant arthropod lineages declined. Their extinction reshaped ecosystems dramatically. Decomposition slowed. Nutrient cycling changed. Forests became denser in some regions and sparser in others. Fire regimes intensified due to increased leaf litter accumulation. The disappearance of arthropod giants marked the end of an era where small body plans could reach extreme sizes. Modern insects are descendants of these giants, but their world is narrower. Oxygen levels restrict growth. Vertebrate predators dominate. Ecological roles are more constrained. Yet the legacy of arthropod gigantism persists in subtle ways. The efficiency of insect design, the success of social behavior, and the dominance of arthropods in terms of species number all trace back to this ancient period of expansion. Arthropod giants demonstrate a crucial principle. Size limits are not fixed. They are environmental. When conditions allow, even the most unlikely body plans can produce giants. When conditions change, those giants vanish, regardless of how successful they once were. This chapter also exposes a deeper truth about evolution. It does not aim for permanence. It explores possibilities. Arthropod gigantism was one such possibility. It flourished, transformed the planet, and then disappeared when the rules changed. The idea that insects were once monstrous is unsettling because it challenges assumptions about stability. The world we know feels normal only because it is recent. Prehistoric Earth repeatedly produced ecosystems that would feel alien today. Arthropod giants are reminders that dominance is temporary and context-dependent. In a different atmosphere, under different conditions, even modern insects could follow similar paths. The blueprint remains. Only the constraints have changed. As we move forward, a pattern is now impossible to ignore. Gigantism arises when energy is abundant, constraints are relaxed, and ecosystems stabilize long enough for extreme forms to evolve. It disappears when any one of those factors collapses. In the next chapter, we will move closer to the present. We will examine the giants of the Ice Age, mammals that rival dinosaurs in mass and presence, and whose extinction brings the story of prehistoric gigantism uncomfortably close to our own species. Next, Chapter 11, Ice Age Megafauna. The end of the age of dinosaurs did not end gigantism. It transformed it. When mammals inherited the planet, they did not immediately grow large. For tens of millions of years, they remained small, cautious, and mostly nocturnal, living in the ecological shadows left behind by extinct reptiles. Yet, given time, stability, and opportunity, mammals would once again push the limits of size. The result was the rise of Ice Age megafauna, some of the most imposing land animals ever to exist. This chapter marks a turning point in the story of prehistoric giants. For the first time, the largest animals shared the planet with humans. The Ice Age world was harsh, variable, and unforgiving. Vast ice sheets covered large portions of the northern hemisphere. Temperatures fluctuated dramatically. Seasons were extreme. Food availability shifted constantly. On the surface, this seems like the opposite of conditions that favor gigantism. Yet megafauna flourished. The key lies in adaptation rather than excess. Mammalian gigantism did not rely on warm, stable, carbon-rich worlds like those that supported sauropods. Instead, it relied on insulation, endurance, and intelligence. Mammals evolved strategies to survive cold, scarcity, and unpredictability. Size became a tool not for dominance alone, but for survival. Large bodies lose heat more slowly than small ones. This principle, known as thermal inertia, favored size in cold environments. A massive mammal could maintain internal temperature more efficiently, reducing energy loss during freezing winters. Thick fur, fat layers, and compact body shapes enhanced this effect. The iconic Ice Age giants were built for cold. Woolly mammoths carried dense coats and thick fat deposits. Giant ground sloths had massive bodies that retained heat and stored energy. Large bison and rhinoceroses were armored with muscle and fur. These animals were walking fortresses against climate. Food quality was low, but quantity was high. Ice Age grasslands, known as steppe tundra, stretched across continents. These ecosystems were dominated by grasses, sedges, and hardy plants. While nutritionally poor, they grew in vast abundance. Large herbivores solved this problem the same way sauropods once had, by eating enormous quantities. Long digestive tracts allowed microbial fermentation to extract nutrients slowly. Large stomachs processed low-quality plant matter efficiently. Size compensated for poor nutrition. Movement was critical. Ice Age megafauna were migratory. They followed seasonal plant growth, retreating south during harsh winters and returning north when conditions improved. Endurance mattered more than speed. Mammals evolved efficient gaits and strong cardiovascular systems that allowed long-distance travel. This endurance also applied to predators. Ice Age carnivores were not ambush specialists alone. Many were pursuit hunters capable of tracking prey over long distances. Cooperation and intelligence became central to success. Hunting was no longer a single explosive event. It was a process. The presence of megafauna shaped Ice Age ecosystems deeply. Large herbivores maintained open grasslands by grazing and trampling vegetation. This prevented forests from reclaiming the landscape. By keeping environments open, megafauna sustained the very ecosystems they depended on. Their dung fertilized soil. Their movement compacted snow, allowing plants to survive winter more easily. Their grazing patterns promoted plant diversity. Once again, giants acted as ecosystem engineers. Predators regulated these populations, preventing overgrazing. Wolves, large cats, and other carnivores targeted weak individuals. This selective pressure maintained herd health and prevented resource collapse. The system was balanced, but delicately. Mammalian reproduction differed fundamentally from reptilian reproduction. Live birth meant fewer offspring and greater parental investment. Young were dependent for long periods. This increased survival in stable systems, but created vulnerability during rapid change. When conditions shifted suddenly, populations could not rebound quickly. Climate oscillations during the Ice Age were frequent. Glaciers advanced and retreated repeatedly. Habitats expanded and contracted. Megafauna tracked these changes successfully for thousands of years. They were resilient. What they were not prepared for was a new kind of pressure. Humans entered this world as a novel predator. Unlike other carnivores, humans did not rely on physical strength or speed. They relied on coordination, tools, and planning. They could target any age group. They could hunt from a distance. They could kill without exposing themselves to danger. Most importantly, humans could learn and transmit knowledge rapidly. Successful hunting strategies spread across populations within generations, not millennia. Megafauna had evolved alongside predators that followed predictable rules. Humans broke those rules. Initially, megafauna did not recognize humans as a threat. Large size had always been protection. Curiosity replaced fear. This hesitation was fatal. Combined with climate stress, human hunting pressure pushed many species past recovery thresholds. Even low levels of hunting were enough. Removing a few adults, each generation could destabilize populations with slow reproduction. Extinction followed a familiar pattern. Populations declined gradually. Genetic diversity dropped. Localized extinctions fragmented ranges. Once isolated, groups vanished rapidly. Within a relatively short geological period, most Ice Age megafauna disappeared. This extinction was different from previous ones. It was selective. Smaller animals survived, adaptable species persisted, generalists thrived, giants vanished. For the first time, a single species played a decisive role in eliminating Earth's largest animals. This realization is uncomfortable. Ice Age megafauna were not evolutionary failures. They had survived millions of years of climatic instability. They were efficient, resilient, and ecologically integrated. Yet, they could not withstand the combined pressure of rapid climate change and a technologically flexible predator. Their disappearance reshaped ecosystems permanently. Grasslands contracted. Forests expanded. Fire regimes changed. Nutrient cycling slowed. Ecosystems became less productive and less diverse. Many regions shifted into states that persist today. Modern landscapes still bear the scars of megafaunal loss. Some scientists argue that many ecosystems are incomplete without large herbivores and predators. This concept, known as ecological anachronism, suggests that plants evolved defenses and strategies for animals that no longer exist. Thorny trees, oversized fruits, and certain grazing-tolerant plants may be evolutionary leftovers. In this sense, the Ice Age giants are not entirely gone. Their absence continues to influence the present. The rise and fall of Ice Age megafauna carries a profound lesson. Gigantism does not require perfect worlds. It can arise in harsh, unstable environments through adaptation and intelligence. But it remains vulnerable to rapid change, especially when driven by a new kind of force. The story also marks the beginning of a new era. For the first time, the fate of giants was tied not to volcanism, asteroids, or atmospheric chemistry, but to behavior, decision-making, expansion, technology. This is where prehistoric gigantism intersects with humanity. The loss of Ice Age megafauna closed the final chapter in Earth's long experiment with extreme size on land. No mammal since has approached their scale. Ecological niches remain unfilled. The planet is quieter, less massive, more constrained. Yet the conditions that once produced giants still echo in climate cycles, in fossil records, and in the biology of surviving species. As we move toward the end of this journey, the question shifts. If giants could arise so many times, why do they no longer appear? What has changed so fundamentally that the age of giants seems permanently over? In the next chapter, we will confront that question directly. We will explore why animals stop getting bigger and whether the limits we see today are absolute or simply the product of a world that no longer allows giants to exist. Next, Chapter 12. Why animals stopped getting bigger. By the end of the Ice Age, a pattern had become unmistakable. For billions of years, life on Earth repeatedly pushed toward extreme size. Oceans produced leviathans, land produced titans, skies filled with giants that flew. Again and again, the limits were tested, reached, and sometimes exceeded. And then, almost abruptly in geological terms, the trend stopped. Animals did not merely get smaller, they stopped trying to get bigger. This was not coincidence. It was not bad luck. It was the result of multiple constraints converging at once. To understand why the age of giants ended, one must examine how the rules of the planet itself changed. The first and most fundamental constraint is energy. Size is expensive. Every increase in body mass requires more calories, not just to grow, but to exist. Larger animals need more food, more water, more oxygen, and more stable environments. When energy flows freely through ecosystems, size can increase. When energy becomes limited or unpredictable, size becomes a liability. Modern Earth is an energy-restricted world compared to much of its past. Primary productivity has declined in many regions. Atmospheric carbon dioxide levels fluctuated downward for millions of years after their prehistoric peaks. Oxygen stabilized at lower levels. Climate cycles became sharper and more erratic. Ice ages intensified seasonality. Deserts expanded. Rain patterns grew less predictable. These changes did not eliminate life, but they narrowed the margin for extreme specialization. Giants require stability, long growing seasons, predictable food supplies, uninterrupted reproductive cycles. Modern ecosystems rarely provide such conditions for thousands or millions of years at a time. The second constraint is oxygen. Oxygen is the hidden currency of size. It fuels metabolism. It allows muscles to contract, nerves to fire, and tissues to grow. When oxygen levels were higher, bodies could afford inefficiency. Diffusion worked at larger scales. Lungs and circulatory systems operated with greater tolerance. Today's oxygen levels are sufficient for complex life, but they are not generous. Animals already operate close to their physiological limits. Pushing size further would require radical redesigns of respiratory and circulatory systems. Those redesigns are not impossible, but they would take immense evolutionary time under stable conditions. Such conditions no longer exist. The third constraint is reproduction. Large animals reproduce slowly. Gestation periods are long. Offspring numbers are low. Parental investment is high. This strategy works only when adult survival rates are extremely high and environmental disruption is rare. Modern Earth is not kind to slow reproducers. Climate change, habitat fragmentation, disease, and competition act rapidly. Populations must rebound quickly to survive. Smaller animals with faster life cycles adapt more easily. They evolve faster. They recover from losses more efficiently. Natural selection now favors resilience over dominance. The fourth constraint is land availability. Prehistoric giants thrived on vast, continuous habitats. Sauropods required entire continents of forest. Ice Age megafauna roamed uninterrupted grasslands, stretching thousands of kilometers. Migration routes were ancient and stable. Today, habitats are fragmented even without human presence. Mountain ranges, ice sheets, deserts, and oceans divide land into smaller units. Continental drift has broken supercontinents into isolated masses. This alone limits the maximum sustainable population of giants. Fragmentation increases extinction risk. Isolated populations lose genetic diversity. Local disasters wipe out entire lineages. Giants cannot persist in small worlds. The fifth constraint is competition. Modern ecosystems are crowded. Niches are filled. Specialization is extreme. Predators, parasites, and pathogens have co-evolved with remarkable efficiency. A giant today would face threats unknown to prehistoric animals. Disease alone poses a severe risk to large populations with low reproductive rates. Parasites scale differently than hosts. A large body offers more habitat, more entry points, more exposure. Prehistoric giants existed before many modern disease dynamics evolved. The sixth, and perhaps most decisive constraint, is intelligence. This is not a flattering observation. It is a biological one. Once a species capable of abstract thought, planning, and tool use emerges, the rules change permanently. Such a species does not need to evolve claws or teeth to hunt giants. It invents weapons. It cooperates flexibly. It alters environments intentionally. Humans represent a new kind of apex force. They are not part of food webs in the traditional sense. They reshape food webs themselves. They hunt selectively. They alter landscapes. They transport species across continents. They remove competitors and predators. Even at low population densities, humans exert disproportionate pressure on large animals. This is not because of malice, but because size makes animals visible, predictable, and energetically rewarding. Large animals cannot hide. The presence of humans alone is enough to cap maximum size. Any lineage attempting to evolve toward gigantism in the modern world would face immediate pressure long before reaching extreme mass. This effect is already visible. The largest surviving animals are either aquatic, where humans have limited access, or protected by distance, danger, or conservation measures. Even then, their populations are fragile. Another critical factor is evolutionary time. The giants of the past did not appear overnight. They emerged over tens of millions of years of relative stability. Such long, uninterrupted periods are now rare. Extinction rates have increased. Environmental turnover has accelerated. Evolutionary pathways are constantly disrupted. Size requires patience. Modern Earth offers none. There is also a mathematical constraint, often overlooked. Structural scaling laws impose hard limits on terrestrial size. Bone strength increases with cross-sectional area, while mass increases with volume. Beyond a certain point, skeletons must become disproportionately thick. Mobility decreases. Efficiency drops. Sauropods solve this problem with air-filled bones, columnar limbs, and specialized metabolism. Mammals lack these adaptations. Birds use hollow bones, but flight imposes separate constraints. Reptiles today lack the ecological conditions that once supported extreme size. In short, the blueprints that worked in the past are no longer viable. The disappearance of giants is not evidence that evolution has stalled. It is evidence that selection pressures have shifted. Modern evolution favors adaptability, intelligence, speed, cooperation, efficiency, traits that allow survival in fragmented, unstable environments. Size, once an advantage, has become a risk. This does not mean that size is irrelevant. Large animals still play important ecological roles. Elephants, whales, and large predators continue to shape ecosystems, but they operate within tighter limits. Their numbers are small, their range is restricted, their future uncertain. The idea that animals stopped getting bigger because evolution reached a natural endpoint is misleading. There is no intrinsic ceiling. There is only context. If atmospheric oxygen rose again, if climates stabilized for millions of years, if continents reassembled into vast continuous landmasses, if intelligent technological predators vanished, then gigantism could return. Nothing in biology forbids it, but under current planetary conditions, the path is closed. This realization reframes the history of giants. They were not inevitable. They were conditional. They existed because the world allowed them to exist. When the world changed, they vanished. The age of giants was not a single era. It was a series of opportunities, each opened and closed by planetary forces. Today, we live in a world that remembers giants only through bones and shadows. Their absence shapes our perception of nature. We accept smaller scales as normal. Forests feel complete without titans. Oceans feel vast without leviathans. Skies feel empty without flying colossi. But this normality is recent. For most of Earth's history, life explored size relentlessly. The fact that it no longer does so says more about our world than about life itself. In the next chapter, we will examine the moments when giants fell, not individually, but collectively. Mass extinctions that erased entire lineages of large animals and reset the biological clock. To understand why giants disappeared permanently, we must understand how suddenly and violently their worlds ended. Next, Chapter 13, Mass Extinctions and the Fall of Giants. The disappearance of giants was not always slow. While gradual decline erased many lineages over time, some of the greatest losses in Earth's history occurred suddenly. These were moments when the planet itself turned hostile, when systems that had supported enormous animals for millions of years collapsed in geological instants. Mass extinctions did not simply remove species. They dismantled entire size structures, wiping out giants disproportionately and reshaping the direction of life. Mass extinctions are defined not by cause, but by scale. They represent periods when a significant percentage of species vanished globally in a relatively short time. Each event had unique triggers, but they shared common consequences. Ecosystems simplified, food webs collapsed, specialization became deadly, and size, once an advantage, became a fatal liability. The earliest mass extinctions set the template. In ancient oceans, when chemical imbalances depleted oxygen, the largest animals were often the first to die. Large bodies require constant oxygen delivery. When oxygen levels drop, small organisms can survive longer by slowing metabolism. Giants cannot. Their tissues starve quickly. Suffocation becomes inevitable. Entire marine ecosystems vanished this way. Reefs collapsed. Apex predators disappeared. Filter feeders starved as plankton populations crashed. The ocean did not empty completely, but it lost complexity. When life returned, it did so cautiously. New giants would eventually emerge, but only after stability returned. On land, mass extinctions were even more devastating. Volcanic events played a central role. Massive eruptions released enormous quantities of carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and ash. Skies darkened. Temperatures fluctuated wildly. Acid rain stripped vegetation. Food chains unraveled from the bottom up. Giant herbivores depended on abundant plant growth. When plants died, giants starved. Their size worked against them. Reserves ran out quickly. Migration routes led nowhere. Predators followed soon after. One of the most severe extinction events in Earth's history nearly erased life entirely. Ecosystems did not merely lose giants, they lost most species. Recovery took millions of years, and when it came, the world was fundamentally different. Giant body plans that had evolved before never returned in the same form. Evolution did not pick up where it left off. It started over. This pattern repeated. Asteroid impacts introduced a different kind of catastrophe, sudden and global. They combined immediate destruction with long-term collapse. Shockwaves flattened forests. Fires raged across continents. Sunlight was blocked for months or years. Temperatures plummeted. Photosynthesis failed. This was catastrophic for giants. Large herbivores required constant intake. Without fresh plant growth, they had no buffer. Starvation set in rapidly. Predators lost prey. Scavengers exhausted carcasses. Within a few generations, ecosystems emptied of large animals. Smaller organisms survived by hiding, burrowing, or entering dormant states. Seeds waited underground. Insects sheltered in debris. Small mammals survived on varied diets and reproduced quickly. Size once again became the dividing line between survival and extinction. What makes mass extinctions particularly lethal to giants is speed. Giants evolve slowly. Their populations recover slowly. When disruption occurs faster than reproduction, extinction is unavoidable. Even after the initial catastrophe passes, the aftermath remains hostile. Soils are stripped, climates unstable, food webs incomplete. Niches remain empty or are filled by opportunistic species. Conditions favor rapid life cycles and flexible diets. Giants cannot compete in such worlds. This explains why mass extinctions often reset size evolution back to small forms. After each extinction, life becomes miniature. Insects, small vertebrates, and opportunistic generalists dominate. Only after millions of years of stability does size begin to increase again. Gigantism is always delayed, but not all giants returned. Each extinction narrowed the range of viable designs. Some blueprints were lost permanently. Once eliminated, they were never recreated. Evolutionary paths closed. This cumulative loss matters. Early giants thrived in worlds with high oxygen, vast habitats, and minimal competition. Later giants existed under more constrained conditions. Each extinction reduced the margin further. By the time mammals rose to prominence, the planet had already lost many of the configurations that once supported extreme size. Extinction also changes evolutionary incentives. In unstable worlds, selection favors traits that allow rapid response to change. Large size offers no such advantage. Intelligence, flexibility, and speed of reproduction matter more. Ecosystems become hostile to specialization. Mass extinctions accelerate this shift. They select against giants not just by killing them, but by reshaping the future in which new species must evolve. There is also a psychological illusion in how we perceive these events. From a human perspective, mass extinctions feel rare in geological time. They are frequent enough to shape the entire arc of evolution. Life has never enjoyed uninterrupted stability for long. Giants require patience from the planet. Extinctions interrupt that patience repeatedly. Even when giants survive an extinction, they often do so in reduced form. Body sizes shrink, ranges contract, diversity drops. The survivors are shadows of former lineages. This phenomenon, known as size reduction following crisis, appears repeatedly in the fossil record. It is not weakness, it is adaptation. But adaptation comes at a cost. Once size is lost, regaining it requires time and opportunity that may never return. This is why the disappearance of giants accelerates over time. Fewer opportunities remain. Constraints accumulate. Worlds that once allowed extremes vanish. By the late Ice Age, the planet was already primed against gigantism. Climate instability was high. Habitats were fragmented. Extinction pressures were frequent. Then humans appeared. Unlike asteroids or volcanoes, humans do not act once. They act continuously. They do not reset the system and leave. They remain. This introduces a permanent extinction pressure that mimics mass extinction conditions locally and globally. Habitat loss, overhunting, rapid environmental change, fragmentation. For giants, this is indistinguishable from living in a constant extinction event. The fall of giants is therefore not tied to a single moment. It is the cumulative result of repeated collapses, each narrowing the path forward until extreme size becomes untenable. The mass extinctions of the past did not just remove species, they altered the direction of evolution itself. They pruned possibilities. Giants were always vulnerable to sudden change. They thrived only when the planet allowed long periods of calm. Those periods became shorter and rarer. The fossil record does not show a smooth trend towards smaller life. It shows repeated attempts at size, followed by violent erasure. The age of giants was not ended by failure of design. It was ended by failure of the world to remain stable long enough to sustain them. This perspective reframes extinction not as an anomaly, but as a governing force. Life does not progress toward complexity or size inevitably. It oscillates. It expands when conditions allow. It contracts when they do not. Giants represent the expansion phase. Their fall represents contraction. Today, we live deep in a contraction phase. Ecosystems are simplified. Extremes are suppressed. Size is capped. Yet the memory of giants remains embedded in life itself. Bones, genes, behaviors. Even human imagination carries echoes of worlds that once existed. As we approach the final chapters of this story, a question becomes unavoidable. If giants shaped the planet so profoundly, what does their absence mean for the future? In the next chapter, we will confront that question directly. We will explore whether giants could ever return, and what conditions would be required for prehistoric scale life to exist again on Earth. Next, Chapter 14. Could giants exist again? The idea that giants could return feels almost mythical. Bones locked in stone suggest a world forever lost, a biological peak that evolution can no longer reach. Yet, evolution does not remember the past. It responds only to conditions. The real question is not whether giants are possible, but whether the planet could ever allow them again. To answer that, we must strip away nostalgia and examine constraints with precision. Gigantism is not magic. It is a predictable outcome when specific conditions align. Throughout Earth's history, giants appeared repeatedly under different body plans and ecological systems. This alone proves that size is not an evolutionary fluke. It is a solution that emerges when the environment rewards it. So, what would have to change for giants to return? The first requirement is stability. Giants need time. Not thousands of years, but millions. Size increases slowly across generations. Bones must thicken. Organs must scale. Behaviors must adapt. Ecosystems must reorganize to support extreme mass. None of this happens quickly. Modern Earth is unstable by geological standards. Climate shifts rapidly. Habitats fragment and reconnect. Extinction rates are elevated. Selection favors short-term survival rather than long-term optimization. For giants to reappear, this instability would need to decrease dramatically. Climates would have to remain predictable for millions of years. Seasons would need to be consistent. Extreme events would need to be rare. This alone makes a return unlikely in the near future. The second requirement is space. Giants require vast, continuous habitats. They cannot survive in small, isolated patches. Migration routes must remain open across continents. Populations must be large enough to maintain genetic diversity. Modern geography works against this. Continents are fragmented. Mountain ranges block movement. Ice sheets expand and retreat. Deserts widen. Oceans divide land masses permanently. Even without human influence, Earth today offers fewer continuous habitats than during periods when giants thrived. Continental drift could eventually change this. Over tens of millions of years, land masses may collide again, forming new supercontinents. Such configurations would increase habitat continuity and potentially allow larger animals to persist, but continental assembly is slow. It does not operate on human timescales. The third requirement is energy abundance. Giants require enormous energy flows. Plant productivity must be high and sustained. Oceans must support massive plankton blooms. Food webs must be broad at the base. This is tied directly to atmospheric chemistry. Higher carbon dioxide levels promote plant growth. Higher oxygen levels improve metabolic efficiency. In the past, these conditions coincided with periods of gigantism. Today, carbon dioxide is rising rapidly, but not in a stable way. Ecosystems struggle to adapt. Oxygen levels remain relatively constant and lower than prehistoric peaks. Ironically, the same changes that increase carbon dioxide today destabilize ecosystems rather than enriching them. Rapid warming disrupts rainfall, soil formation, and nutrient cycles. Productivity becomes uneven rather than abundant. Giants need steady abundance, not chaotic extremes. The fourth requirement is biological innovation. Past giants were not simply larger versions of smaller animals. They were built differently. Sauropods used air-filled bones and columnar limbs. Marine leviathans relied on buoyancy and filter feeding. Flying giants exploited thermals and lightweight structures. For new giants to evolve, lineages would need to rediscover or reinvent such solutions. This is possible in principle. Evolution is creative under pressure, but it requires time and opportunity. Most modern lineages are already specialized for current conditions. Radical redesign carries risk. In a stable world, such experimentation could succeed. In an unstable one, it is usually eliminated. The fifth requirement is absence of intelligent technological predators. This is the most decisive factor. Even if all other conditions were met, the presence of a species capable of coordinated hunting, long-range weapons, habitat modification, and rapid learning creates a ceiling on size. Large animals are visible, predictable, slow to reproduce. They cannot adapt behaviorally at the pace required to survive sustained pressure from such a force. This is not a moral statement. It is ecological reality. As long as humans exist in their current form, terrestrial gigantism is effectively capped. Any lineage trending toward extreme size would encounter selective pressure long before reaching prehistoric scales. Marine giants face slightly better odds due to the difficulty of access, but even there, technology erodes safety. Ships, sonar, nets, and industrial exploitation reach deep into oceans. No habitat is truly inaccessible. For giants to return fully, this pressure would need to vanish or change fundamentally. This could occur only under extreme scenarios. Human extinction, radical reduction in technological capability, or transformation of human behavior into complete non-interference with megafauna. Even then, recovery would take millions of years. There is also the question of whether giants should return. Past ecosystems were not inherently better. They were different. Gigantism brought productivity and stability in some ways, but it also involved immense suffering, high mortality, and constant pressure. Life at extreme scale is not gentle. Modern ecosystems are not inferior simply because they lack giants. They are adapted to current constraints. Smaller animals can be more diverse, more flexible, and more resilient in fragmented environments. Yet something undeniable has been lost. Giants provided functions that no small animal can fully replace. They moved nutrients across continents. They shaped vegetation at scale. They stabilized ecosystems against certain fluctuations. Their absence leaves gaps that are only partially filled. This raises the idea of artificial reintroduction. Some propose rewilding with large animals as functional substitutes. Large herbivores introduced into modern landscapes can restore some lost processes. Grazing, trampling, nutrient cycling, and fire suppression can be re-established at limited scales. But these are approximations, not true returns. We cannot recreate sauropods or mammoths at full ecological scale. Even if cloning were possible, the world they require no longer exists. Without that world, giants would suffer and fail. There is also a deeper philosophical question. Evolution does not move backward. It explores new possibilities. The giants of the past were solutions to past problems. Modern life faces different challenges. The future of life may involve complexity, intelligence, and cooperation rather than mass. Size is only one axis of success. It is tempting to view the age of giants as a golden era. In reality, it was one of many experiments. Its end does not represent decline, but transition. That said, the potential for giants remains embedded in life's capacity. If Earth were to enter another long period of stability, if continents reassembled, if atmospheric composition shifted gradually and predictably, if technological pressures vanished, then over tens of millions of years, size could rise again. The giants of that future would not be replicas of the past. They would be built from different lineages, mammals, reptiles, or something entirely new. Evolution does not repeat designs exactly. They would face new constraints and exploit new opportunities. This possibility underscores an important truth. Extinction is not the end of possibility. It is the end of specific outcomes. The fossil record is not a museum of failures. It is a record of conditions met and conditions lost. Giants existed because the world allowed them to exist. Their absence means the world has changed. Understanding this helps clarify our role. Humans did not end gigantism alone, but we now maintain the conditions that prevent its return. We are not simply observers of evolutionary history. We are participants in it. Every decision that fragments habitats, alters climate, or removes large animals reinforces the ceiling on size. Conversely, actions that stabilize ecosystems, preserve large continuous habitats, and reduce rapid change create space for life to explore again, even if not toward gigantism. The future of life on Earth will not be defined by whether giants return. It will be defined by whether ecosystems regain the stability required for long-term evolutionary creativity. Giants are symbols of that creativity. They represent what life can do when constraints loosen and time is generous. Their story is not a warning against ambition. It is a lesson about dependence. Size is not power in isolation. It is power supported by environment. As we approach the final chapters, the focus shifts once more. Having explored the rise, dominance, and disappearance of giants, we must ask what their legacy truly is. What did the largest animals ever to exist leave behind? Not just in stone, but in the functioning of the planet itself. In the next chapter, we will examine how humans arrived too late to witness the age of giants, and how that absence shaped our myths, fears, and understanding of nature. Next, Chapter 15. Humans arrived too late. By the time humans emerged as a global species, the age of giants was already ending. The planet they inherited was quieter, smaller, and less extreme than the worlds that came before. Oceans still held leviathans, but not the kinds that once dominated entire food webs. Land still supported large animals, but none approached the scale of prehistoric titans. The skies were empty of true giants. Humanity arrived after the peak. This timing shaped everything. Humans did not evolve alongside the largest animals ever to exist. They evolved in their absence. What we know of giants comes not from shared history, but from fragments buried in stone. Bones, teeth, footprints, and shadows in sediment are all that remain of worlds humans never saw. This distance has consequences. When humans imagine nature, they imagine a downsized version of reality. Forests without towering browsers, plains without continent-spanning herds, oceans without super predators shaping entire ecosystems. What feels natural to us is not the norm of deep time. It is a reduced state. Early humans encountered megafauna, but even these animals were remnants. Mammoths, giant sloths, massive bison, and large predators represented the final echo of a much longer tradition. Compared to sauropods or ancient marine leviathans, Ice Age giants were already constrained. Yet even these were overwhelming. For early humans, encountering megafauna would have been a profound experience. These animals were not abstract concepts. They were immediate, dangerous, and essential. They provided food, materials, and meaning. Hunting a giant was not just survival, it was a cultural event. This relationship shaped human psychology. Humans evolved in a world where large animals still mattered. Fear, respect, and awe became deeply ingrained responses. These emotions did not disappear when the animals did. They persisted, redirected toward stories, symbols, and myths. Many early cultures carried memories of giants in distorted forms. Dragons, titans, world serpents, sky beasts. These figures appear independently across civilizations. While not literal records, they reflect a shared cognitive imprint. Humans expected the world to contain beings larger than themselves. Fossils amplified this effect. Long before science, humans encountered massive bones eroding from hillsides, skulls larger than any living animal, teeth the size of tools. Without context, these remains demanded explanation. Giants, monsters, gods. Imagination filled the gaps left by lost ecosystems. Even today, the discovery of large fossils triggers fascination disproportionate to their scientific value. Size captures attention instinctively. It resonates with something ancient in human perception. This fascination is not accidental. For most of human evolution, large animals were the primary external threats and opportunities. They could kill, but they could also sustain entire communities. Understanding them meant survival. Misjudging them meant death. Our brains evolved to notice size. This explains why stories of giants endure, why films, art, and literature repeatedly return to oversized creatures, why scale itself feels meaningful. Yet there is irony here. Humans are obsessed with giants, precisely because we never truly lived among the greatest ones. Had we evolved alongside sauropods or aerial leviathans, size might feel mundane. Adaptation would have normalized it. Instead, we encountered only fragments and late survivors. Absence fuels imagination. Humans also arrived too late to learn from giants directly. Giant animals shaped ecosystems in ways modern humans barely understand. They redistributed nutrients across continents. They stabilized landscapes. They influenced climate feedbacks. When they vanished, those processes faded with them. Humans inherited ecosystems already simplified. This simplification created opportunities. Smaller animals are easier to hunt. Ecosystems without massive engineers are more malleable. Landscapes become easier to control. Agriculture becomes possible. Forests become denser. Rivers behave differently. In this sense, the loss of giants made human civilization easier, but it also created blind spots. Humans often struggle to recognize what is missing. Degraded ecosystems feel normal when there is no memory of abundance. This phenomenon, known as shifting baseline, affects how we perceive nature. Each generation accepts a reduced world as the default. The absence of giants is one of the largest shifting baselines in Earth's history. We assume that modern ecosystems are complete. They are not. They are functional under current constraints, but they lack elements that once maintained resilience at scale. Humans compensate with technology. We move nutrients artificially. We manage fires. We control populations. We reshape rivers. We attempt, often imperfectly, to replace processes that giants once handled automatically. This substitution is energy-intensive and fragile. Giants were self-maintaining systems. They required no planning. Their movement alone created balance. Once gone, their functions must be replicated consciously or lost entirely. Human arrival also altered the narrative of evolution. Before humans, extinction was impersonal. Volcanic eruptions, climate shifts, asteroid impacts. After humans, extinction gained agency. Choices mattered, behavior mattered. Responsibility emerged. This shift changes how we relate to the past. We do not merely study giants as victims of natural forces. We recognize our role in ending the last of them. This awareness creates tension, fascination mixed with guilt, admiration mixed with regret. This emotional complexity shapes modern conservation. When humans attempt to protect large animals today, they are not just preserving species, they are preserving the last living connection to a vanished world. Elephants, whales, large predators. These animals feel important beyond their ecological roles. They feel symbolic. They represent continuity with deep time, proof that size and power still have a place in nature. Yet they also highlight limits. Even with protection, their populations are fragile, their ranges restricted, their futures uncertain. They survive not because conditions favor them, but because humans choose to intervene. This is unprecedented. Never before has a species deliberately attempted to preserve evolutionary outcomes that the environment itself no longer supports naturally. This raises uncomfortable questions. Are we preserving giants or suspending their extinction temporarily? Are we maintaining ecosystems or curating them? Are we restoring balance or redefining it? There are no simple answers. What is clear is that humans arrived at a moment when gigantism had already receded. We did not witness its peak. We inherited its decline. This shapes our understanding of nature profoundly. We often assume that evolution trends toward intelligence or complexity. The fossil record suggests otherwise. It trends toward opportunity. When opportunity allows size, size emerges. When opportunity closes, it disappears. Humans mistake their timing for inevitability. Had humans evolved 50 million years earlier, they would have lived in a world dominated by giants beyond imagination. Their societies, technologies, and beliefs would have formed differently. Perhaps intelligence itself would have taken a different path under constant pressure from extreme size. Instead, humans evolved in a narrowed world, one already stripped of its largest extremes. This made dominance easier, control more achievable, expansion more rapid. In this sense, humanity is a product not only of evolution, but of absence. Absence of giants. This realization reframes human exceptionalism. We did not conquer a world of titans. We inherited a world where titans were already gone. The giants did not fall to humanity alone. They fell to planetary change. Humans merely closed the door. This perspective invites humility. We are not the culmination of natural history. We are one outcome among many. shaped by timing and circumstance. Our dominance reflects conditions, not destiny. The memory of giants survives because it fills a psychological void. It reminds us that the world was once bigger than us, not just in size, but in scale of possibility. That memory matters. It anchors human imagination in deep time. It challenges complacency. It suggests that what exists now is not the limit of what can exist. As we reach the final chapter, the focus shifts from loss to meaning. The giants are gone, but their influence remains in ecosystems, in evolution, and in human thought. The final question is not whether giants will return, but what their existence tells us about life itself. In the concluding chapter, we will examine the legacy of prehistoric giants, not as curiosities or monsters, but as teachers. What the largest animals ever to exist reveal about the balance of life, the fragility of worlds, and the conditions that allow extremes to flourish. Next, Chapter 16. The legacy of prehistoric giants. The giants are gone, but their absence is not emptiness. It is a presence of a different kind. It is a pressure felt in ecosystems, in evolutionary pathways, and in the way humans imagine the natural world. The legacy of prehistoric giants is not confined to fossil beds or museum halls. It is written into the functioning of the planet itself. To understand that legacy, one must move beyond size as spectacle and consider size as process. Giants were not remarkable merely because they were large. They were remarkable because they altered how energy moved through the biosphere. They accelerated cycles, stabilized extremes, and connected systems that would otherwise remain isolated. In many ways, they were the conduits through which life operated at planetary scale. One of the most enduring legacies of giants is ecosystem engineering. Giant animals physically reshaped environments in ways no small organism can replicate. Their movement compacted soils, redirected water, and opened vegetation. Their feeding altered plant communities. Their waste fertilized landscapes. Their migrations transported nutrients across continents and oceans. These effects were not side consequences. They were core ecological functions. When giants disappeared, ecosystems did not simply lose species, they lost processes. Modern ecosystems often appear stable, but many are simplified versions of their former states. Productivity is lower, diversity is reduced, resilience is diminished. Systems that once absorbed shocks through the buffering influence of large animals now respond more sharply to disturbance. This loss is not always obvious. Forests still grow, grasslands still exist, oceans still teem with life, but the scale is different. The feedback loops are weaker, the margins are thinner. Giants provided redundancy at the highest level. When smaller processes failed, giants compensated. When drought struck, migrations redistributed pressure. When fires threatened, grazing reduced fuel. When nutrients accumulated unevenly, movement smoothed distribution. Without giants, ecosystems rely on smaller-scale mechanisms that are easier to overwhelm. Another legacy lies in evolutionary constraint. The presence of giants shaped the evolution of countless other organisms. Plants evolved defenses, growth patterns, and reproductive strategies in response to large herbivores. Predators evolved tactics to exploit massive prey. Parasites evolved to survive on large hosts. Even microbes adapted to the digestive systems of giants. When giants vanished, these evolutionary pressures did not disappear instantly, they lingered. This is why many modern organisms appear mismatched to their environments. Fruits too large for any living disperser, thorns that deter no present herbivore, behaviors that seem excessive or inefficient. These are not mistakes. They are evolutionary echoes. Life carries memory not only in genes, but in mismatches. The absence of giants has left behind biological questions with no living answers. Giants also influenced the direction of evolution itself. When size dominated success, selection favored traits that scaled well: structural efficiency, energy conservation, long lifespans, slow reproduction, balanced by high survival. Intelligence, expressed through memory and migration rather than rapid learning. As giants vanished, selection shifted. Today, success favors flexibility, rapid reproduction, behavioral plasticity, short generation times, intelligence expressed through problem solving and social learning rather than sheer scale. This shift does not mean modern life is inferior. It means it is optimized for a different world. The legacy of giants is therefore not a single lesson, but a contrast. They reveal what life does when constraints loosen. Modern organisms reveal what life does when constraints tighten. This contrast deepens understanding of evolution as a contextual process rather than a directional one. Giants also challenge human perspectives on power. Human societies often equate dominance with intelligence, technology, or speed. Giants demonstrate another form of dominance, one rooted in mass, persistence, and integration with environment. They did not conquer landscapes. They became landscapes. This distinction matters. Human dominance tends to simplify systems. Control requires reduction. Giants maintained complexity. Their presence increased diversity rather than suppressing it. This does not make giants morally superior. It makes them functionally different. Understanding this difference is essential when humans attempt to manage ecosystems. Many conservation efforts focus on protecting species without restoring processes, preserving animals without restoring scale. The legacy of giants suggests that function matters more than form. Protecting a large animal in isolation does not recreate the ecological role it once played. Scale cannot be faked easily. Another part of the legacy is temporal perspective. Giants force humans to confront deep time. Their existence spans millions of years. Their disappearance often occurs within geological moments. This contrast reveals how slowly systems build and how quickly they can collapse. It also challenges human impatience. Modern societies operate on short time horizons, years, decades, at most centuries. And giants evolved in worlds that remain stable for spans that exceed human history many times over. Their story exposes the mismatch between biological and cultural time. This mismatch has consequences. When humans alter environments rapidly, they break the conditions under which complex systems form. Giants remind us that some outcomes require patience beyond cultural memory. The fossil record of giants is therefore not just a catalogue of lost species. It is a warning about speed. Speed kills scale. Another legacy lies in the oceans. Marine giants persist today in diminished form. Whales remain the largest animals ever to live. They are living reminders that under the right conditions, size can still thrive. But even these survivors operate under constraint. Their populations are small, their ranges fragmented, their lives shaped by noise, pollution, and climate change. They survive not because conditions favor them, but because extinction has not yet caught up fully. This precarious existence highlights a final truth about giants. They are not resilient in unstable worlds. Their continued survival depends on restraint from forces outside natural selection. In this sense, modern giants exist in a suspended state, maintained by conscious intervention rather than evolutionary advantage. This situation is unprecedented in Earth's history. Never before has a species deliberately attempted to preserve outcomes that the environment no longer supports naturally. Whether this can succeed long-term remains uncertain. Giants also shape human ethics. Because they are large, visible, and emotionally powerful, they command attention. Conservation campaigns focus on them, and funding follows them. Narratives form around them. This attention can be beneficial, but it can also distort priorities. Ecosystems are not built only from giants. Microbes, plants, and small animals underpin all life. Giants depend on them completely. The legacy of giants should therefore encourage holistic thinking. Size magnifies impact, but it does not replace foundation. Giants also influence how humans imagine the future. Science fiction and speculative biology often return to gigantism as a symbol of abundance or danger. Giant creatures represent either paradise or apocalypse. This reflects a deep association between size and environmental excess. When we imagine future giants, we imagine worlds that are either overflowing or out of control. This reveals how tightly size is linked to environmental conditions in human thought. Giants are not just animals. They are indicators. In the fossil record, giants appear when worlds are rich, stable, and permissive. They disappear when worlds become constrained and volatile. This pattern suggests a way to read the planet. If giants were to begin evolving again, it would signal a return to long-term stability and abundance. Their absence signals ongoing constraint. In this sense, giants are not relics. They are metrics. Their story also reframes extinction. Extinction is often viewed as failure. Giants demonstrate that extinction can also represent environmental shift rather than design flaw. They were well adapted to their worlds. Those worlds vanished. This distinction matters when interpreting the present biodiversity crisis. Many modern extinctions are framed as species failures. In reality, they are signals that environments are changing faster than adaptation allows. Giants remind us that success is conditional. No trait guarantees survival when context collapses. Perhaps the most important legacy of giants is humility. They show that life is capable of far more than what exists now. They challenge the assumption that modern ecosystems represent peak complexity or efficiency. They remind us that the present is not the standard by which all of nature should be judged. At the same time, they caution against nostalgia. The age of giants was not a golden age. It was a phase. It involved immense suffering, intense competition, and frequent collapse. Size did not eliminate struggle. It magnified it. Romanticizing giants misses the point. Their true value lies not in admiration, but in understanding. They teach that evolution explores extremes when allowed, that ecosystems can operate at scales unfamiliar to modern experience, that stability enables creativity, that disruption erases possibility. They also teach that absence can be as influential as presence. The world today is shaped as much by what is missing as by what remains. Recognizing that absence sharpens perception, it reveals hidden assumptions about what is natural, normal, or inevitable. The giants of prehistoric Earth are therefore not ghosts. They are reference points. They anchor understanding of scale. They contextualize modern life. They expose the contingency of dominance. Their bones in stone are not just records of anatomy, they are records of conditions. The largest animals ever to exist were not accidents. They were expressions of planetary states. When those states changed, the expressions vanished. This realization dissolves the idea of linear progress. Evolution does not march toward intelligence, size, or complexity. It responds to opportunity. It retreats when opportunity closes. Giants were opportunity made flesh. Their legacy endures not because they were the biggest, but because they reveal how deeply life and planet are intertwined. In a world that often feels constrained, crowded, and diminished, the memory of giants offers perspective. Not a call to recreate the past, but a reminder that the future is not limited to what exists now. Life has exceeded imagination before. It may do so again in forms we cannot predict, but only if the conditions allow it. The story of prehistoric giants is therefore not a closed chapter. It is a mirror. It reflects what Earth once was, what it is now, and what it could become under different rules. The largest animals ever to exist are gone, but their lesson remains clear. Size is not the point, context is, and context, unlike anatomy, is something that can change.